I'll never forget it. I saw the sheet. I don't remember if it was a poster or a sheet. I just remember what it said. I remember there was paragraphs, there was bullet points. And it was the thing that was outlining, I was in sixth grade, it was the thing that was outlining what you needed to do to submit an application to run for student government. And as I took a look at that sheet, I was in sixth grade, and I was like, if I'm going to run the free world at some point as President of the United States, I probably ought to start with my school. And so I decided, boom, that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to fill out my application. And in my mind, I was like, you know what? I'm just going straight to the top. I know I'm a sixth grader. I know eighth graders typically hold the presidential position for student government. Doesn't bother me, though. That's what I'm going for. And then somebody talked me out of it. They're like, hey, there's some eighth graders who've been in student government, since last year. They're incumbents. So it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult for you to unseat them. You should probably aim a little lower, like treasury or treasurer or like, what's the other one, secretary or something like that. And I was like, no. But I will concede it might be a big step for me to go from, I was the president of the Space Club for a while in fourth grade that I created for myself. And then I did. We had people in it. I took up dues, and then I got in trouble for collecting money from children, had to give it all back. So anyway, that's a whole nother thing. I kept good account of it, though, okay? I had a little red pencil box, and opened it up, it was like $50 in there in quarters. It was awesome. Anyway, but I was thinking to myself, I was like, okay, you know what? I probably need some experience. I don't know what I don't know, so I'm going to run for vice president as a sixth grader. And so that's what I did. So I ran for vice president in sixth grade. I got my friends together, got my political machine moving. I was a big baseball fan, and so we made pennants with my name on them. We hung them all over the school. I booked time with the teachers. I was at a small private Christian school from zero to eighth grade, and then I went to public school and high school, which that was what is this? You know what I'm saying? But anyway, we're digressing. I booked time with all of the grades, all the teachers and all the grades, and I went into the classrooms, and I sat there on a little stool, and I was sitting on the stool, and I would say, hey, so what do you need? What do you expect from me? What can I deliver to you in my political career to make sure that this school is better? And they would say things like, hey, our pizzas need to be bigger in the lunchroom. We need larger chocolate milk. We need more recess time. And I was taking notes, right? And that's what I ran on. I was like, look, I'm here for you. Okay, so that's what I'm running. I guarantee bigger pizzas, bigger chocolate milk, more recess time. I'm going to take care of these things for you because I'm a man of the people. And that's what I ran on. And sure enough, sixth grade, I was elected vice president of student government. And vice presidents, as we all know, do absolutely nothing, right? Unless something happens to the president, vice presidents don't do a hill of beans of nothing, except for look pretty. Like they just walk around, or figureheads. So I got no power. The president's in charge of everything. They're still setting their own agenda. I'm just like, okay, well, if something happens to you, like you fail out or something like that, which that's not going to happen. She was super smart. Like if something happens, I'm just nobody, right? So I was like, seventh grade year, I'm getting, we're changing this thing. You know what I'm saying? So seventh grade year, got the political machine up and running again. Boom, one president. I was like, look out, school. Here it comes. Here comes the changes that I told you last year I was going to do. A typical politician. I made a bunch of promises. None of that came true. But I was like, in seventh grade, I was like, look, now I'm president. I can do things. Turns out they don't allow me to change the size of the pizzas or the amount of chocolate milk in the cartons or the length of recess. Nevertheless, I was still president, right? And to me, that's what mattered. You know what I'm saying? That's what mattered. Eighth grade year, I was like, man, how can I level up? How can I level up? I said, you know what? Maybe the reason I couldn't get the change I wanted was because I needed better people, in the other positions that are aligned with me before we get elected. So this time, when I was running for president, I was like, look, I'm gonna choose who I want to be vice president and treasurer and secretary, and we're gonna run just on one big old ticket. And instead of putting my name on all the pennants, I put all four names on the pennants. And we ran as just like one complete package. And I told everybody, if you vote for me, you better vote for them. Don't you dare vote for me and not vote for them, because we are a team and we're gonna move change through. That's what we're gonna do. That's what we're gonna get done. And so sure enough, all four of us, we won. I was pumped. I was like, look at this. This is incredible. Victory lap. This is going to be great. I'm about to usher in change in this private Christian school. They have no idea what's coming. And that's when the principal called me to his office. He said, which in my mind, I was thinking, you know what? He probably wants to have a really good conversation because I have a mandate now. I have a mandate for my agenda. he probably wants to have a conversation to make sure that I endorse some of his thoughts. That's what I was thinking in my mind as I'm walking to the principal's office. And I walk into the principal's office, and he says, hey, have a seat. And he does what any good teacher or someone who leads kids or just anyone who leads anyone, he starts with nice things. He's like, man, this is so great. You've been SGA since 6th grade and 7th grade and president now second time, and you got your friends all elected. I was like, I know, this is great. This is good. Like, how can I help you? How can I help you? He said, well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. You see, there's never been anybody in our school that has approached the student government the way that you've approached it. And I'm still thinking this is a good conversation. And I'm like, yes, sir, that's right. And he said, and the way you've approached it, while it's been successful to you, it isn't in the spirit of our school as a whole. And I was thinking, I'm like, what do you mean it's not in the spirit? This is all really good stuff. He said, yeah, we've never had anybody tell other students how to vote for other positions. And I was like, well, you're welcome. I don't know what to do. I'm still disconnected here, And he said, well, we just don't find it fits into our values and the way we want our student body to conduct themselves. And so next week, I'm going to convene the student body, and I would like for you to resign. And I was confused. I was like, what do you mean, resign? He's like, yeah, I want you to step down, and I want you to write a speech, and I want you to deliver it to the school. And so that's what I did. I went home. I don't remember my parents being upset about this, which, and thinking about it now, it's like, this should have been a red flag, but it wasn't. Just like, okay. So I went home and I wrote a speech on some, loose leaf ruled paper. I don't know what the name of it is. And I remember folding it up in my pocket. I wore navy blue pants and a white polo shirt. It was part of our uniform. And I remember putting it in my pocket. And I remember they gathered the whole school together. And I pulled my speech out of my pocket. Principal stood in front and said, hey, our president, Clint, would like to address something. He's got a speech for you. So I walked, as 8th graders, we sat in the very back of the assembly. And so I walked up the entire center aisle, pulled that speech out of my pocket, and put it on the podium, and I resigned. And I was furious. I was heartbroken. But I resolved that no one would ever do that to me again. That I would learn something from this experience. And there would never be another soul that out politically maneuvered me. And so I got angry. I was embarrassed. And that embarrassment fueled my pride. And I became an enormously political person. Politics has always had a negative connotation with it. I mean, when we look at Merriam-Webster's unabridged dictionary, at that point in my life and for the next few number of years, I was the definition of this: a politic person, especially a shrewd and crafty schemer. Politics has had a negative slant to it. If we go back to 1955, we see this excerpt in a magazine. It says, a reporter put to President Eisenhower recently an inquiry of this type. The newsman asked the president how he liked, quote, the game of politics. Quick as a wink, Mr. Eisenhower said his questioner was mouthing a, quote, derogatory phrase. Being president, Ike conceded, is, quote, a very fascinating experience. Grimacing, he added, but the word politics, I have no great liking for that. We don't have to go back to the 50s, though, to find this. We can go back to the writings of Shakespeare or the writings of the Senate in the Roman Empire. I mean, as long as we can think of, when there's been government and movement, there's been some type of negative connotation associated to the idea of politics. We find this even in the biblical narrative. In the biblical story for the last 5 weeks, we've been walking through one of the most politically charged lives of anyone recorded in the entirety of Scripture. And moment after moment, there was this political maneuvering that was taking place, and over again, a guy by the name of Joseph had decisions to make. Do I make the political move, or do I make what we have counterbalanced that with as a spiritual move? And oftentimes, those two were so vastly different, they might even be considered opposites. Up until now, if you haven't been here for the last 5 weeks, let me give you just a very short version of where we're at in this guy's life, so when we pick up, it kind of makes sense. Joseph was the favorite child of a man named Jacob. Jacob had a second name. Anybody remember that second name? Israel. Jacob/Israel had a bunch of boys, and his favorite son was Joseph. He treated him as a favorite, clothed him as a favorite. His brothers hated him for it. Eventually, Joseph started having dreams about how incredible he was, dreams about his brothers bowing down to him, and his mother and father even bowing down to him. Eventually, the brothers had enough. They were off tending sheep. Joseph was sent to go check on them. When he gets there, they decide, we are so far from home, about 50, 60 miles from their home. They said, let's kill him. Let's cut up his coat, dip it in some goat's blood, and take it back and tell our father, sorry, a wild animal got him. And that was the plan. One of the brothers interrupted, though. His name was Reuben. Reuben said, hey, whoa, hold on. We can't kill, let's not kill him. Who are we? Right, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. Another brother named Judah said, yeah, I mean, honestly, why would we kill him? I mean, what is there to gain in us killing him? Let's sell him. And that's what they did. They sold him into slavery. They received money for their brother as they sold him into slavery. Sold Joseph into slavery. He gets taken to Egypt. While he's in Egypt, he's bought at a slave auction by a guy named Potiphar. He was the captain of the guard. He brings Joseph in as a slave. Joseph is incredible. Eventually, he earns the trust of Potiphar. Potiphar gives him the role of overseeing his entire household. That goes well for a number of years until he grows into a grown man. He's a teenager when he gets sold into slavery. Joseph's now a grown man. He's in his 20s, and Potiphar's wife thinks that he is something special and decides, hey, you know what? I'm going to make an advance at you, and I'm going to take you to bed because that's what I want to do. I get what I want. That's what Potiphar's wife's thinking. And Joseph is like, no, absolutely not. No, that's not me. I'm not that guy. I couldn't do that to him, and for sure, this is just not who I'm about, right? She pursues him and pursues him and pursues him. Eventually, she gets so aggressive that she gets physical with him, and he runs out of the house, and she's left holding a piece of his clothing. And then she's got to explain, why do I have some clothing and why is he running away from me? So she comes up with a story and says, hey, he tried to make sexual advances at me. This is the proof I have. I still have some of his clothing while he ran away. And so, of course, he gets thrown into prison. He gets thrown into prison. He's there for a couple of years. He meets some people that worked with Pharaoh, a cupbearer and a baker. Eventually, they have dreams. They ask him to interpret them. He does. He's like, hey, would you remember me by chance if you get out of here? Because for sure, I didn't do what they said I was in here. And they were like, yeah, everybody in here didn't do what they said they did, right? Okay, got it, Joseph. They never remember until Pharaoh has a dream. In fact, Pharaoh has 2 dreams. No one can tell him what they mean. He sees in the dreams 7 cows that are fat and happy and 7 cows that are emaciated and gross. And the emaciated, gross cows eat the fat and happy cows, like just gobble, gobble, gobble them up. Like it's a nightmare. Can you picture that happening? Skinny cows eating fat cows one bite at a time. That's what happened. He wakes up and he's alarmed by it. He's like, what does this mean? Nobody can tell him. The cupbearer says, there was a guy in prison. Hate to remind you that I was in prison, but there was a guy while I was in prison that could tell me my dream. And so he's like, well, call him up. And so he brings Joseph in, and Joseph tells him what the dream means. He says, hey, the 7 fat cows, they represent 7 years of plenty, incredible abundance. However, the 7 skinny cows represent 7 years of depletion, famine. You're going to run out. And what you've got to do about it is this. You've got 7 years to store up enough to survive the 7 years of famine, and it's going to start soon. That's what the dreams mean. And then he just keeps talking. He's like, and if I were you, I would probably appoint someone who might be able to figure this out. And so the guy's like, well, why don't I appoint you? And he's like, cool. I wouldn't do anything anyway other than prison. So that's where he's at. So this is where we are in the life of Joseph. Genesis 41, 56, 57. When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians. For the famine was severe throughout Egypt. And all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe everywhere. Now remember, he left home around 17 when he was sold into slavery. He starts working for Pharaoh at age 30. So 13 years. It's now been another 7 years because the 7 years of plenty has passed. And so now we're at, 13? That's 20 years that he's been gone. It's been at least 20 years since he received his beat down from his brothers, thrown in that dry well, and then sold into slavery. So we fast forward, chapter 42, verse 1. When Jacob, this is Joseph's father back home, when Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" He continued, "I've heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us, so that we may live and not die." That's a moment, if you've got kids and they like, something's going on and they're just sitting there arguing with each other, not solving the problem. He's like, fellas, why are you just standing around? I told you there's grain in Egypt. Go buy some grain in Egypt and come back. Now, what's important, that last line, don't forget this one. Hold on to it because we're going to get back to it in about, probably say 55 minutes. The very end, it says, go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die. Don't forget that. So that's where they go. The brothers, they get together. All of them but one. Benjamin stays home. Benjamin, closely related, all of them are closely related because they're all brothers in some form or fashion. However, Benjamin Joseph and Benjamin were brothers by the same, both mother and father. And that's why their mother was the favorite of Jacob's. And that's why it was such a big deal when he lost Joseph, or he thought he lost Joseph. Benjamin is the only one left from that wife. And so he didn't want anything to happen to him. And so he was like, hey, Benjamin's staying here. Last time I sent Joseph, he didn't come back because he got bit by or eaten by a wild animal. Y'all going to Egypt, but Benjamin's staying here. So the 10 brothers, they go to Egypt. They get into Egypt. I don't know if there's a line that says, hey, need grain, come stand in line here. It doesn't tell us. It just says eventually they get into the process to receive grain from the storehouses in Egypt that Joseph has been heading up, though they have no idea that's what's been happening. And sure enough, they get to the front of the line, and guess who is there to receive them? Joseph. Now, here's the thing, though. They didn't recognize Joseph because Joseph has now been in Egypt for 20 years. Not only does he walk like an Egyptian, he talks like an Egyptian. You know what I'm saying? That's what he does. He's not even speaking their language anymore. So he gets there. He sees his brothers, and they stand in front of him, and immediately recognizing not Joseph, but this is a powerful man in Egypt, they bow down to him. And immediately Joseph remembers his dream. So in this moment, what would Joseph do? Revenge? Reconciliation? Something in between? 42, 8, and 9. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Then he remembered his dreams about them and said to them, "You are spies. You've come to see where our land is unprotected." Now, he doesn't think they're spies. He doesn't know what to say. He knows for sure they're not spies. You know, he knows that they're all his brothers from their father back home and that they're just hungry. There's no doubt in his mind. He knows they don't even have a family or an army big enough to do anything to Egypt. He has no concern about it. And so he asks them, he questions me. He's like, so, you know, if you're not spies, then tell me who you are. And they're like, we're brothers. No, we're brothers. Like we're not from different families. We're from one family. We got one daddy back at home and a little brother. And so he says, okay, you got a little brother at home. Like, yeah. He says, okay. Prove it. Why don't one of you go back and get the little brother, which would have been his full brother, right? From his mom and dad. Why don't you go back and get that little brother? Bring him to me. The rest of you stay with me. And if you bring back the little brother, then your story checks out. Well, that's not a good idea because they already know Daddy said Benjamin's not going to Egypt. You know? They are detained. We fast forward 3 days. 3 days. Genesis 42, 18, and 20. On the third day, Joseph said to them, do this and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison, while the rest of you go and take the grain back for your starving households. But you must bring your youngest brother to me, so that your words may be verified and that you may not die. This they proceeded to do. So change the plans. At first, it was like one stays here, everybody goes. And then after 3 days, Joseph's like, the reason they're here is because my whole family's starving to death back. One of them can't carry all this grain. So he comes back and he's like, guys, change the plans. One of you stay, the rest of you take the grain back to your family, which is strange that he would say if he thinks they're spies, because he knows they're not spies. And he's like, you know what? Take the grain back to your families. But one of you stays here. That guarantees you're going to bring Benjamin back, right? And so they're like, all right, that's what we're going to do. So they set off to go and do that. Well, as they're getting ready to make that happen, they're having some conversations. I don't know if they're loading the wagons. I don't know what they're doing, but they're having some conversations. And this happens. Verse 21 says, they said to one another, surely we are being punished because of our brother. They're talking about Joseph and what they did to him 20 years ago. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come on us. Reuben replied, didn't I tell you not to sin against that boy? But you would not listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood. Now remember, Reuben is the one that convinced them not to kill him. And his plan was, let's put him in the well. And then when they were all like not paying attention, he was going to take the boy out and take him home. And then daddy was going to make sure he was protected the rest of his life. That was Reuben's plan. Before Reuben can get him out of the well, though, he convinced him not to kill him. Before Reuben can get him out of the well, they sold him. So Reuben's just like, I told y'all this was going to happen. Verse 23. They did not realize that Joseph could understand them since he was using an interpreter. He turned away from them and began to weep. But then he came back and spoke to them again. What must have this been like for Joseph? Like to hear what they're saying in his native language. To hear the heartache and the anguish. And so he takes Simeon, one of his brothers, and he says, hey, Simeon's going to stay with me. The rest of you go, take the grain back. Now, what's interesting is as they're headed back, they have to feed their cattle, horses, whatever they're riding on, and they open up their sacks of grain. And they find the money they took and paid for the grain in the sacks of grain. All the silver. Now, Joseph put it back in there, not to trick them, but because he was giving grain to his family. But they didn't take it that way. They were like, now we've been set up. Now they planted evidence saying that we didn't pay for it. So when they get home to their dad, I'm sure his dad's probably like looking like, oh, the boys are back. Look at that grain. Them mules are full. But we got to feast tonight. And all of a sudden he's like, so where's Simeon? You know? And like, well, what had happened was, so Simeon's back we left Simeon in Egypt. Now, listen to this. All they had to do was go to the grocery store in Egypt. That's all they had to do. And come back. And they didn't went, it's not like they went to Publix and like left their kid in Walmart. Like they went to another country and left their brother in another country. That's what happened. And like Simeon's with the guy that gave us the grain. Because he thinks we're spies. And he's willing to let us prove we're not spies. We just got to take Benjamin back with us. He's like, excuse me? Oh, nothing. I was just saying Benjamin's got to go back with us. Benjamin? Oh, no. No. In fact, this is what Jacob says to him, 42:26. It says, their father said to them, you have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more, because he thought he was dead, and Simeon is no more. Now think about this. Simeon is alive. They have told him, Simeon's alive. We can get Simeon back. We've just got to show him Benjamin. But to Jacob, he was like, no, Simeon's dead. There's no chance I'm sending Benjamin anywhere outside, not with you boys. Last time, what is y'all's problem? Joseph's gone. Simeon, I'm considering him dead because there's no chance Benjamin's leaving my house. Joseph is no more. Simeon is no more. And now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me. Now, eventually, time passes by, and they run out of food again because the famine's still going. And so Jacob tells his boys, he says, hey, y'all got to go back to Egypt. You got to go back to Egypt and get more grain. And they stand up, and they're like, we can't, Dad. The guy in charge over there said, we will not have an audience with him, which means we can't get grain unless we bring Benjamin. I don't know how long it's been, but they got enough grain to last for a long time, long enough for like Jacob to forget that was the deal. It's been so long. Simeon's just been chilling out in a holding cell the whole time. Like, are those guys coming back? And so like, we cannot go back without Benjamin. So, Judah, one of the brothers, Judah stands up and says, hey, look, I'll take responsibility for Benjamin personally. I give you my word. I'll make sure that he's fine. All my life, I'll make sure that he's fine. And so they take Benjamin, they head back to Egypt. Now, when they get there, this time, they see Joseph. Joseph invites him over for dinner. That's strange, you know? Invites him over for dinner. They get to the house. They have prearranged seating, and they are sat in order of birth, which they start looking at each other. The Bible says they start looking at each other like, this is so wild. Like, how did he know? Like, there's a lot of us, you know what I'm saying? Like, I got 2 kids, and sometimes I forget which one was born first, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's a bunch of them, right? There's 11 of these boys. Perfect order. And so they're wondering, what is going on? There's one moment in the dinner where Joseph has to remove himself from where they're having conversation because he can't control his emotions. But he goes back in, and finally he says, hey, I'm going to send you back. Verse 1 and 2 of chapter 44. Now Joseph gave these instructions to the steward of his house. Fill the men's sack with as much food as they can carry, and put each man's silver in the mouth of his sack. Then put my cup, the silver one, in the mouth of the youngest one's sack, that's Benjamin, along with the silver for his grain. And he did as Joseph said. Now, they didn't see that took place. The boys take their bags, they load it all up, and they start heading off. Now, Joseph lets them get a little ways away, and he goes to another servant and says, hey, go chase them boys down. My silver cup's missing. And so sure enough, they go chase them down. Now, I don't know if they're like Gideon up on horses chasing them down, or they're running. I don't know, like Iron Man, like Forrest Gump across the country. I'm not sure. But they chase them down, and they're like, hey, fellas, boss's cup is gone. Y'all the only ones who's been around it. And they're like, oh, it wasn't us? There's no chance. No. None of us are going to bite the hand that feeds us. No, we're not going to do that. That's not us. No chance we have stolen this guy's cup. And so line up. We're checking your sacks. So sure enough, they start going. By eight, old as the youngest. By age, they start going through them. Boom, nothing. They get down to Benjamin's. Pull out the cup. Oh, you can read it. They start tearing their clothes. They're like, no, Benjamin. You know, them little brothers, the youngest, they just, what are they thinking sometimes? You know what I'm saying? Benjamin, have you lost your mind? And Benjamin's like, I didn't do it. Of course you didn't do it. You never do it. Judah, who promised his dad, speaks up. He says, now then, please let your servant remain here as my Lord's slave in place of the boy. and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come on my father. Now, this is so different than Judah from 20 years ago. Judah from 20 years ago said this about Joseph. What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. And his brothers agreed. The key phrase is, what will we gain? Like, if we just kill him, we really don't get anything out of it. But if we sell him, if we sell our brother for money, now we've gained something. What's interesting is that Judah is a Hebrew name. And we find the Greek version of that name in the New Testament. So this story is in the Old Testament, written in Hebrew. In the New Testament, written primarily in Greek, the name for Judah, or the translation into Greek from Hebrew, is Judas. And Judas is another name who also sold his brother for money. That brother's name is Jesus. Joseph gathers them all together because the even swap, one for one, is not going to fly. He brings them all together. Chapter 45, verse 4. And he tells them, Then Joseph said to his brothers, Come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. Now just pause here. Like, what are they thinking at this moment? Now, Joseph has changed, right? Because he was talking like an Egyptian before using an interpreter. All of a sudden, he looks at them and he begins to speak their language. And he says, I'm your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. What would they be thinking? In this moment, this really difficult, tense moment that's been created, there's something that we can learn here. There's an opportunity for the people who have done wrong to respond. And I think sometimes that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing to give them an opportunity. Maybe they're going to apologize. Maybe they're going to say, oh, snap, we shouldn't have done that. My bad. How are things? You've done well, you know. I don't know. But somehow, there's also an opportunity in moments like this for the more spiritually mature person to still lead in the moment. And though sometimes the leading in that moment, the more spiritually mature person might say, I do want to give them some space to respond. But I can think of a lot of opportunities where helping and leading them to an appropriate response is probably the more loving thing to do. Joseph undoubtedly saw this happening in them, and so Joseph, being the more spiritually mature, he leads them in how they should think about the response. This is what Joseph says. And now do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. And in this moment, I'm like, Joseph, you're saying stupid things again. What do you mean, don't be distressed and don't be angry with yourself? That's exactly what will teach them a really good lesson they won't forget. You should be upset with yourselves. You should be distressed. This is the opportunity right now in this moment where you should now be on your knees begging me for mercy. That's what I'm thinking. But that's not what Joseph's thinking. How do we get to that place as Joseph? Well, in this particular situation, when someone has wronged you the way that they wronged Joseph, there's just really one word that helps you get there. It's forgive. Now, this is the important thing to think about forgiveness. Joseph forgave his brothers before they ever came to Egypt. Joseph had been able to conquer and move past his trauma and the things that were done to him, even though his brothers had no clue they were going to be faced with these decisions in their future. Joseph had come to a conclusion that forgiveness and moving past it and overcoming it and asking God to leverage that evil for good was the best way for him to live his life moving forward. That sitting in unforgiveness and hatred and disappointment and disgust, that wouldn't actually help him become who he wanted to be. And he had a case better than probably all of us, because as he moved through his own forgiveness for his brothers, all that did was land him in slavery and then as a servant and then in jail. And for 13 years, that was his life. So he probably had a pretty decent case to say, maybe I should try something different. Maybe I should allow the anger inside of me to fuel me to a different way of seeing and viewing the world. Maybe I should allow what I've learned here about being schemed by my brothers to inform how I'm not going to allow that to happen to me ever again. And that I will then leverage all of the opportunities I have to get what's mine. To make sure that I'm taken care of and I'm provided for, except for that's not what Joseph did. Joseph forgave and then simply went back to the default, the easiest place for any follower of Jesus. God, what do you have for me today? Regardless of my circumstances, I want to just say yes, sir, and get to work. The truth is, forgiveness isn't about them ever, even though we want it to be. Sometimes we want people to earn our forgiveness, or maybe even ask for our forgiveness. The truth is, why would we give someone that kind of power in our lives to try and earn our forgiveness or ask for our forgiveness? No, the thing that's present in the absence of our own forgiveness, it takes control of who we are. But the moment we can forgive, it allows us to become who we're supposed to become, regardless of what anyone else has done in or to our direction. The truth is that Joseph realized his life was actually bigger than himself. And he didn't know to what extent that was going to be, but every day he just said, God, I want to be a part of your glory, your mission, your kingdom. And eventually that purpose unfolded. In fact, he had no clue, but we get a pretty good clue here in verse 7. He finishes his conversation with him, but God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. Now, remember, let's go all the way back to that verse I told you not to forget. I said, hold on to this. Remember, Jacob said at the very beginning, fellas, you need to go to Egypt and get grain so that we can live and not die. Now, this is why that's important. Before we get to Jacob or Israel, there was a guy named Abraham. And Abraham was given a promise that the entire world, all the way through every part of the future, would be blessed through him. Abraham, incredibly, through a miracle, had a son named Isaac. And Isaac then had a son that we've been talking about named Jacob or Israel. Jacob, one of his sons' name is Judah, the one that's the same name as Judas. And it's through the line and lineage of Judah that we then get Jesus. So when Jacob says, go to Egypt, that's where we're going to be saved. He wasn't just talking about his family. It was the line and lineage of Jesus himself. Over the last 5 weeks, each week we have talked about a choice. And the choice is either the political move or a spiritual move. What an opportunity for Joseph to get revenge. But we ask the question each week, but who is Joseph and what will Joseph do? And the response every single time is Joseph just continued to do what Joseph does, which is submit his entire life somehow to the will of God. You see, he wasn't a political person. He participated in political things, but that didn't define him. When the people around him thought about Joseph, they didn't think politics or political beliefs. They knew it was something else. The political move. Make everything political. Make helping people political. Make feeding them political. Make housing them political. Make your conversations political. Make your ideas political. Make your friends political. Make your family political. Make your workplace political. Make the way you react to things political. Make the inside of your home political. Make your heart political. Allow your mood to change based on what's political. Create your future outlook based on what's political. In fact, go ahead and just identify yourself based upon your political beliefs. And that's one option. Or there's a second option. A spiritual move. Make everything spiritual. See, for the last 5 weeks, over and over and over again, you have simply saw on the screen what our world wants you to believe. Everything is political. It's one way to look at it. But I would say they're wrong. I believe everything is spiritual. I believe that helping people is a spiritual decision. It's never a political decision. Feeding people is a spiritual decision. It's not a political decision. Housing people, it's not a political decision. It's a spiritual decision. My conversations and interactions with other people, I want them to sense that there's something unique. But I don't want that uniqueness to be something political. I want them to feel that there's something spiritual about my life. My ideas, I hope they flow from the heart of God, not from a political platform. Our finances, they should be spiritual. Our friendships should be seen through a spiritual lens. Our family ought to be seen through spiritual eyes. The work that we do with our hands and our head ought to be seen through a spiritual lens. My home should be built on a spiritual foundation. I have to respond out of the work the Spirit is doing inside of me. My heart should be aligned with the Spirit of God Himself. My mood should be impacted more by the Spirit than some political movement. And my future should be about the spiritual. I should be known because of who I am spiritually, not what I think politically. That my identity is in Jesus before any other label the world would like to offer me. The truth is, we are born to be spiritual people. We flourish as spiritual people. We are most satisfied as spiritual people. So I would encourage you, don't ever settle. to be a political person. You see, politics as we know them, they were an invention by man. And you, whether you even believe it or not, were made by God. And that identity runs deeper, even deeper than the idea of democracy. And the kingdom of God will outlast any declaration of independence, any bill for voting rights, any women's suffrage movement, anything that you can think of that would be a hot button issue. The truth is, Jesus will make things right. Not Republican, not Democrat, but right. And as we tag along for that journey and we say that prayer, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, we will begin to recognize that we actually have more in common with the God who made us than the politics who want to make us. 2 years ago, started praying about this series. When I first took a look at where we could walk through these lessons and be challenged, and started looking at the number of weeks. I had a little writing journal that I was writing notes in, and I remember being nervous about it because I knew that it was going to be a politically tense season. And I know that the work that we do as a church to create a You Belong Here movement means that there is a very politically diverse room that you're sitting in. In fact, it might be the most politically diverse room that you'll sit in at any point in your week. And the reality is that the way that polarization works in our particular country is that once you choose sides, you separate yourself from the other side. And I knew that there was a potential that during this particular political season that we might see one side or the other distance themselves from other people. And I'm so proud to be a part of a church where that's not what's happened. When you look around the room, both here at the 11 and at the 9, attendance just continues to increase. It's not going in the opposite direction, even in the midst of us having political conversations every single week. I don't know if I've ever been so direct and intense as I was last week to both sides of an aisle. And I wasn't sure how that would go over, but I knew it was the truth. And yet here you are. For those of you that I'm friends with on Facebook, I follow you during this political season. I search and take a look to see how things go. I've had so many really great conversations with many of you about how something came up in a family discussion or online or at the grocery store and how you responded differently. Not because of a teaching here and because it was dynamic, but because simply you were asking the question, how would Joseph respond in this political moment? And the truth is that each of you, collectively as a church, are doing that hard work in this political moment. And our community as a whole needs you, each and every one of you, to continue to lead in a way that creates space for people that disagree with you, with the hopes that we would find common ground in a resurrected Jesus. And so many of you are doing it. That doesn't mean you should avoid political conversation by all means. It does mean you should avoid dehumanizing people and considering them worthless wastes of space. And you're doing it. And I'm so grateful to be a part of your lives politically, but more than that, spiritually. Because I believe the work that you've done over these last few weeks is just the start of an incredible movement here in Coweta County, where we realize that doing the right thing has nothing to do with politics and everything to do with Jesus. And it doesn't bother me one bit that we would be out in front leading the charge, just one step behind Jesus himself. So thanks for the last 5 weeks. Really good job.